This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. The headlines. Chinese state media has confirmed Kim Jong-un did visit Beijing for talks this week. NATO expels 7 Russian diplomats over the spy poisoning in Britain. Moscow calls it part of a containment policy.
This is about containing Russia, creating problems for Russia.
I'm Sharon Jikleel in London, also on the programme. Cricket Australia says only 3 players knew about plans to cheat against South Africa, but big questions remain. A floating sun shield for the Great Barrier Reef. The inventor tells us it could save one of the world's natural treasures.
Live from our studios in Singapore and London. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Glad you could join us. It's 8 in the morning here in Singapore and 1 a.m. in London. And we begin Newsday with some breaking news. And over the past few minutes, Chinese state media has confirmed that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week. There had been speculation that Mr. Kim was on his first foreign trip in 7 years after a train associated with the North Korean leadership was spotted in the Chinese capital. And we'll have more details of this development on Newsday later on in the program. And now, NATO is expelling 7 Russian diplomats from its headquarters in Brussels in response to the nerve agent attack in the UK. 26 countries have now taken similar action in solidarity with Britain, expelling a total of more than 140 diplomats. Russia's foreign minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will respond in kind. Here's a report from Steve Rosenberg in Moscow.
It looked like a game show, but this was Russian TV on the diplomatic war with the West. The names in the frames, the string of countries who'd expelled Russian diplomats over the Salisbury attack. 26 countries have now ordered expulsions. Moscow's point is that the West has got it in for Russia.
This is not about poisoning some former agents. This is about containing Russia, creating problems for Russia with its sovereign and independent foreign policy.
And could a diplomatic war morph into something more dangerous?
This confrontation has certain logic. And this logic is to step up. Each next move should be stronger than the previous one. And with this we can reach a pretty dangerous situation when militarization of behavior will be inevitable.
The one expression you hear more and more to describe the growing tension between Russia and the West is new Cold War. But in fact, what we have now is potentially more dangerous than the Cold War. Because back in the days of communism against capitalism, both sides stuck to the rules of the game. Today, it seems, there are no rules.
Steve Rosenberg there in Moscow. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia are still in a critical but stable condition in a British hospital. Up to now, the relatives in Russia have said very little about the incident, but now in her first television interview, Mrs. Skripal's niece, Victoria, has told Olga Ivshina from the BBC Russian service that she is not interested in the political war of words.
Сделал, не знаю. Вот честно не знаю. Я не могу, вот знаете, там наши, там это британские спецслужбы, британские, что это Россия, это рука Кремля, не знаю. И вот, не знаю, не хочу гадать. Хочется, да, хочется узнать, что с ними, что, вот как.
Что именно, да?
Что именно,
какое конкретное состояние?
Да.
А если бы, условно говоря, вам сейчас предложили британские власти поехать, вы бы поехали?
Естественно. Естественно, я не отказываюсь никогда. Большие девочки, в чудеса не верим, но хочется думать, а вдруг это не они? А вдруг это не они? Ну вот вдруг случится чудо, это не они. Ну,
Или вдруг поправится?
Или вдруг поправится? Ну, поправится, да, тут уже как бы все говорят, что как бы даже если поправятся, то прогнозов никто не делает хороших. Вот.
And that was Sergei Skripal's niece, Victoria. Let's take a look now at some of the day's other news. In Russia, President Putin has declared a national day of mourning after 64 people, most of them children, died in a fire at a shopping center in Siberia on Sunday. People in Moscow held a vigil for the victims as Mr. Putin blamed what he called criminal negligence for the tragedy and suggested that safety certificates had been obtained with bribes. Our correspondent Paul Adams sent this report.
Grief turning to fury on the streets of this Siberian mining town. 2 days after the fire, people are angry. Resign, resign, they shout. Local officials are bombarded with questions. How many people really died? Were children locked inside? Why were the fire alarms not working? The crowd smells corruption. The sign above the mayor's assistant reads, "How much are your closed eyes worth?"
I've got nothing more to lose. My whole family has died. My youngest sister, my wife and my 3 children. My wife rang me quite late. She just wanted to say goodbye to me.
Inside what's left of the shopping complex, a scene of utter devastation. This place was packed on Sunday. When the fire broke out, it swept through the building with appalling speed. On one of the upper floors, the cinema where many of the children died. The man leading the investigation says those responsible for safety simply ran away. The view from above is equally shocking. Is there evidence here that corners were cut? Vladimir Putin visited the city this morning, offering condolences, saying what happened was inexcusable.
An investigation group of 100 people is working here. They will go through the whole chain, starting with those who issued licenses and up to those who were responsible for safety.
In Moscow this evening, a silent vigil for the victims. The people here promising not to forget what happened in Siberia 2 days ago. What began as a local tragedy now has the potential to turn into a national scandal. Fires like this are not uncommon in Russia, and behind them there's often a story of corruption, fast money and lax oversight. This disaster raises a host of difficult questions. Paul Adams, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, also making news today, Vietnamese singer and free speech activist Mai Khoi was detained at an airport in Hanoi on Tuesday. After being released, she took to social media saying she had been held for 8 hours. Mai Khoi speaks out against state censorship in Vietnam, where human rights groups say at least 129 people are in detention for criticizing or protesting against the government. A former dean of Michigan State University who supervised USA Gymnastics abuser Larry Nassar has himself been charged with criminal sexual conduct. Prosecutors allege that William D. Strample used his office to proposition and assault female students. Court documents say dozens of pornographic images were found in his office, some featuring students at the university, and a video of Larry Nassar and a young patient. Now, scientists studying bears in Sweden say hunting may be leading females to raise their cubs for longer. The study says that compared with 2 decades ago, more female bears are nurturing their cubs for an extra season, staying with them for 2.5 years. Now, like many other countries that allow bear hunting, Sweden bans the shooting of bears in family groups. Now, 3 Australian cricketers involved in a ball tampering incident in South Africa are being sent home and have been told they will face significant sanctions. At a news conference, the chief executive of Cricket Australia, James Sutherland, said knowledge of the incident was limited to the captain, Steve Smith, David Warner and Cameron Bancroft. Now, the team coach, Darren Lehmann, will remain in his job. Well, our correspondent in Sydney, Howell Griffiths, spoke to me about the reaction in Australia to the investigation so far.
Yeah, a lot of people waking up to the news and the footage from that press conference, and a lot of people talking about what wasn't said and the absence of the word cheating. James Sutherland, the CEO of Cricket Australia, very careful in the wording he used, talking about the spirit of the game, the integrity and reputation of cricket. Lots of people here in Australia wanted him to be a bit more blunt and straightforward, saying this was cheating, but they understand maybe there is a legal process that they need to go through, not just in terms of handling the players, but also all those sponsors who want answers as well. The other thing, discussion now, is what those sanctions will be when the 3 players are sent home. Some people talking about a 6-month ban. Well, would that really make much of a difference? A 12-month ban would probably have more of an impact, but that would put things forward to the next Ashes series against England next year.
Right. And, well, a lot of surprise as well within the industry that the coach, Darren Lehmann, wasn't made to resign. I mean, surely it must reflect badly on him that he really didn't have a clue what was going on.
Absolutely. In a way, you can't win. Either he was in on this plot or he simply wasn't in control of what was happening amongst his senior players. It's not a good look either way. Certainly some former cricket internationals been on social media this morning saying, I think there's more to come out of that dressing room in Cape Town. A cricket dressing room is a very small place, and over the coming weeks and months we may learn more. But yeah, Darren Lehmann holds on to his job. It's going to be a tough ride for him for the rest of the contract, though, because that question, that suspicion, will probably hang over him.
And it was Howell Griffith in Sydney speaking earlier to Sharon. And let's return now to our breaking news story. And over the past few minutes, Chinese state media has just confirmed that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping this week. Joining us now for more analysis is Chad O'Carroll from the Korea Risk Group. Chad, thank you so much for joining us. What more can you tell us about this meeting between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un?
Well, right now the details of the meeting are very Spartan, as is normally the case when a North Korean leader visits China. Kim Jong-il went to China a number of times before he died in 2011, and each time he went, the media reportage followed this exact same template. The train went to China, it came back, and only then did official Chinese and North Korean media start releasing initial details about the meeting.
But Chad, how significant is this meeting between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un before a historic gathering between Donald Trump and Kim this coming May?
Well, it's significant for a number of reasons. First of all, this is Kim Jong-un's first official meeting with any other world leader. Secondly, it's Kim Jong-un's first ever trip overseas since becoming leader of North Korea. There's been talk that he's been very concerned about travel, which may be why he's gone in this armored train. And thirdly, coming so soon ahead of 2 big summits with South Korean President Moon and US President Trump strongly suggests that this may have been hastily put together in an effort to get endorsement from what is, at the end of the day, a country that has a lot of leverage and a lot of influence over North Korea, whether Kim Jong-un likes that or not.
And Chad, China has traditionally brokered international talks with Pyongyang in the past, but it is still basically unclear what role it will have in these forthcoming meetings between Trump and Kim.
That's right. The main issue at play here is North Korea's nuclear program. As the North Koreans always state, this is a bilateral issue between Washington and Pyongyang. While China did play a big role in engineering the 6-party talks aimed at denuclearization in the past, this time, absent any real agreement between Washington and North Korea, it's hard to see what role China can play. That being said, China will be very interested in knowing what is going to be coming up. It doesn't like surprises, and it probably doesn't like having been, at least on the surface, left out of this whole process thus far.
Thank you so much for joining us from NK News, Chad O'Carroll. And you're watching Newsday on the BBC, live from Singapore and London. Still to come on the program. We'll have more on our breaking story at this hour, the confirmation that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did visit Beijing, and he met up with President Xi Jinping of China. We'll have more on that. Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Thanks for staying with us. I'm Sharon Jiklail in London. Our top stories. A recap of our breaking news. Chinese state media has announced that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did meet Xi Jinping this week. The South Korean government said he traveled with his wife.
NATO is expelling 7 Russian diplomats from its headquarters, the latest international sanctions in response to the nerve agent attack in the UK. Let's now take a look at some of the front pages from around the world, and we start off with the South China Morning Post of Hong Kong, and it focuses on the unconfirmed visit, which is now confirmed, that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited China. It says Kim's distinctive green train was reported to have left Pyongyang yesterday. After less than a day, it was expected to rattle back across the border in the opposite direction. He indeed met with President Xi Jinping. Shifting our attention to the Philippine Daily Inquirer, it reports on a demonstration by the city's poor in Manila. The protesters are shown carrying crosses representing what they say is the burden of their communities, from taxes to extrajudicial killings. And finally, the China Daily has a front-page picture of a boat race. Contestants paddled their boats to drum beats in the University Dragon Boat Competition in Hangzhou. All in all, 15 universities took part in this competition, with Peking and Harvard universities leading the way. And now in trending, Sharon, which story is sparking discussions online?
Well, Rico, if you take a look at this video right now, it's of a wedding which didn't go exactly as planned. A barn owl, as you can see, was actually the ring bearer. And while it made it down the aisle, after its first landing on the best man, things start to go wrong. And you can see a bit of the pandemonium there. But of course, you can see the whole video, if you want, on bbc.com. Now, back to our main story, the breaking news that Kim Jong-un met with China's Xi Jinping this week. And we've got Christopher Hill, who was the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2005 and 2009. Now, crucially, he also led the delegation on the 6-party talks on the North Korean nuclear issue. Welcome to the program, Ambassador. So tell us, just how significant is this meeting with Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping?
Well, obviously, it's very big news. He hasn't been out of the country before. And the Chinese, I think, have made very clear to Kim Jong-un that they are not going to receive him until he gets back to the position of being prepared to give up his nuclear weapons. The Chinese use the term, when the circumstances are right. Well, clearly, things are happening. And the Chinese have some hopes that he is actually going to put denuclearization on the table when he meets with Donald Trump. Obviously, we've got a long way to go. It seems like years until May comes up, although it's just a matter of weeks. But we have to see. But clearly, the Chinese are trying to see if they can make sure something moves forward. And finally, I don't think the Chinese want to be ignored through all this. I think they want to play a role. And so I think that's a big factor as well.
And based off your experience in those Six-Nation talks and the negotiations that have gone through with North Korea in the past, are you hopeful for some kind of success this time around?
We're very hard to tell. We don't have a lot from the North Koreans on this. We have the South Koreans quoting the North Koreans. So we're really not sure how much the North Koreans are really there on this. But the fact that the Chinese invited Kim Jong-un after years of shunning him, especially after he had his uncle Chung Song-Tek sort of perp-walked out of a party meeting and killed the next day. Chung Song-Tek was sort of China's man in his government. So they have been very unhappy with him, and yet this week they've now invited him for this 4-day meeting. So clearly they think something's afoot. And I just hope the Trump administration is kind of up to this. And frankly, this new National Security Advisor, John Bolton, he has never been particularly thrilled about talking to the North Koreans. So this will require a change of heart on his part.
And do you think the Chinese, as you say, they want to play a part, but it clearly shows that they still have a great deal of influence on essentially being the only ally to North Korea?
That's absolutely true. They have a big amount of influence. And I don't think they've been very happy as South Korea has kind of taken this show over and has only worked with the U.S. Now, the South Koreans did go to the Chinese and brief them, and presumably the Chinese have their own methods of finding out what has actually happened. But I think it's very significant.
All right, Ambassador Christopher Hill, I'll let you get away to attend to that alarm that's going off in the background. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Well, the Louvre Museum in Paris says it may allow its most treasured painting, the Mona Lisa, to go on tour in France. The first time it's left the building in almost half a century. Da Vinci's masterpiece has only officially traveled overseas twice before. The pair of lucky locations were Japan and the United States for 2 exhibitions in 1963. A new edition of the history of the trip, the Mona Lisa in Camelot, has just been published. Jane O'Brien went to the National Gallery of Art in Washington to find out more.
The immortal masterpiece of Leonardo da Vinci, Mona Lisa, or La Gioconda, is now in America.
It was the cultural coup of the century. The Mona Lisa arrived in New York Harbor after a perilous voyage across the Atlantic, amid serious misgivings by many art experts, not to mention the French public.
In the American capital, Mona Lisa will be the artistic attraction of all time. They've insured it for an estimated $100 million.
The visit by the world's most famous painting was made possible by the world's most famous woman at the time, the First Lady Jackie Kennedy.
This was 88 days that changed America, and only Jackie Kennedy could have pulled it off. 2 million people lined up in long, snaking lines, both at the National Gallery and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And imagine, some of them had never stepped foot in a museum before.
The Mona Lisa was taken under police escort straight to the National Gallery of Art in Washington and placed in a vault. Experts had just a few weeks to recreate the humidity and temperature of the Louvre before she was put on display.
1 million ordinary Americans lined up outside the National Gallery to see the Mona Lisa for themselves. And in January 1963, it was the who's who of Washington.
And this is where she was.
This is the exact spot. She was hung against the most dramatic red velvet baffle.
It had taken Mrs. Kennedy a year to secure the Mona Lisa and was almost entirely due to the charm offensive she employed against this man, the French culture minister André Malraux. She met him in Paris, invited him to dinner at the White House, and there clinched the deal.
She's leaning very close to his shoulder, sort of tucked up under his ear, and Minister Malraux whispers her a pledge that would make history. He said, "I will loan you one of our great artistic treasures. I will loan you the Mona Lisa."
The Mona Lisa established the National Gallery's international reputation and created a new awareness of art as a tool for diplomacy.
Mr. Minister, we in the United States are grateful for this loan from the leading artistic power in the world, France.
From Washington, the Mona Lisa travelled to New York, where 1 million more people stood in line to see her. The visit was a milestone in the history of art, an event that even today has been hard to equal. Jane O'Brien, BBC News, Washington.
I've seen the Mona Lisa several times. The last one was 2 years ago at the Louvre Museum. And you've been watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. Stay with us. It's the third day in our series on Indian agriculture. Today, the issue of food waste. 40% of India's fruit and vegetables are spoiled from a lack of refrigeration. We'll hear what can be done to tackle this huge problem.
And before we go, a recap of our breaking news. The Chinese President Xi Jinping has held talks with Beijing with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. There had been lots of speculation that Mr. Kim was on his first foreign trip in 7 years. And that's after a train associated with the North Korean leadership was spotted in the Chinese capital. Of course, the visit comes ahead of proposed discussions between the United States and North Korea over its nuclear and ballistic missile program. China, of course, traditionally has brokered international talks with Pyongyang, but really unclear what role it will play this time.